November 8th, 1942. The beaches of Oran, Algeria. A young American soldier crouches behind a shattered stone wall, his fingers trembling as they grip an unfamiliar weapon. A metal tube, roughly as long as he is tall. Through the dust and smoke of Operation Torch, he watches a French Renault tank crawl toward his position, its machine gun spitting fire across the beachhead. He shoulders the tube. His loader slides a rocket into the rear and taps his helmet. The soldier aims at the tank's side, now just 50 meters away, and squeezes the trigger. A flash, a whoosh. The rocket streaks forward, trailing smoke, and strikes the armor with a sharp crack. But the tank keeps moving. The rocket failed to detonate. A dud. The soldier drops behind the wall as machine gun rounds tear chunks from the stone above his head. This was the bazooka's baptism of fire. And it was a disaster. Within weeks, reports flooded back to Washington, describing a weapon that misfired more often than it worked, that demanded soldiers approach tanks at suicidal distances, and that German tankers openly laughed at when they first encountered it. One captured panzer commander told his interrogators that American infantry carried plumbing pipes to battle and that his crew had taken bets on how many hits their tank could absorb before lunch. The Germans called it the Offenrohr. The stovepipe, a joke weapon, a desperate improvisation by a nation that didn't understand armored warfare. They were wrong. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you're watching from today. By the time the war ended in May 1945, that laughable tube had evolved into one of the most feared infantry weapons on the battlefield. It had knocked out thousands of German tanks, including Tigers and Panthers that were supposed to be invulnerable. It had given American infantry the courage to stand their ground when 50-ton machines rolled toward them, and it had forced the German army to completely redesign its tactics, its tank armor, and eventually to copy the weapon they had once mocked. This is the story of the bazooka, not the technical manual version, but the human one. The story of how a weapon that failed spectacularly in its first battles became a symbol of American pragmatism and industrial might. How soldiers learned to use it despite its flaws. How German engineers went from dismissing it to desperately trying to understand it, and how one simple principle, a shaped charge that concentrated explosive force into a jet of superheated metal, changed armored warfare forever. It's a story about underestimation, about the gap between engineering theory and battlefield reality, about how sometimes good enough beats perfect, and how arriving on time matters more than arriving with the best. And it begins not with generals or weapons designers, but with a joke. The musical instrument that became a weapon 1935. American radio audiences are laughing at Bob Burns, a comedian whose signature prop is a bizarre musical instrument he calls a bazooka. It's essentially two gas pipes and a whiskey funnel that produces a sound somewhere between a trombone and a dying moose. Burns plays it on national radio. Americans love it. 7 years later, in May 1942, at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, Lieutenant Colonel Edward Uhl is walking past a scrap pile. He's been assigned an impossible task: create a way for infantrymen to deliver the new M10 shaped charge grenade against German tanks. The grenade works. It can penetrate 60 millimeters of armor. But throwing it by hand is suicidal. You have to get within 10 meters of a tank, and the grenade weighs almost 2 kilograms. Uhl is staring at the scrap pile when he sees it, a simple metal tube about the diameter of the grenade. The answer hits him like lightning. Put a small rocket motor on the grenade, launch it from the tube held on a soldier's shoulder, and suddenly infantry can engage tanks from 100 meters instead of 10. He grabs the tube. Within days, he and Colonel Leslie Skinner have built a crude prototype. The morning of the trial at Aberdeen, they realize they have no sights for the weapon. Uhl grabs a wire coat hanger from a nearby office and bends it with his hands into a rough aiming device. It's fastened to the tube with a broken nail. The test begins. On the range, various teams demonstrate their spigot mortars. the weapon type that military planners believe is the future of portable anti-tank warfare. These are complex devices with precisely machined components. They fire heavy rounds that arc through the air toward targets. That morning, 5 different spigot mortar teams fire at a moving tank. Not one scores a hit. Then Uhl and Skinner step up with their tube and coat hanger sight. Uhl shoulders the weapon. The rocket launches with a sharp crack and a trail of smoke. It flies straight, not in an arc, and strikes the moving tank dead center. He fires again. Another hit, and again. 3 for 3. Major General Gladian Barnes, watching from the observation post, is stunned. He walks down to the firing line, takes the weapon from Uhl's hands and fires it himself. The rocket hits the target. Barnes lowers the tube, looks at its simple construction, its improvised sight, and says what everyone is thinking. It sure looks like Bob Burns's bazooka. The name stuck. By the end of that day, General George Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, had seen a demonstration and ordered 5,000 units. By June 1942, the weapon was standardized as the 2.36-inch rocket launcher M1. By August, the first bazookas were shipping to units training for the invasion of North Africa. The weapon seemed almost insultingly simple. A steel tube, 60 inches long, weighing about 13 pounds, a wooden shoulder stock with a compartment for batteries, a wire grip, a basic trigger mechanism. Iron sights calibrated for 100, 200, and 300 yards. That was it. No complex machinery, no precision optics. A farmer could look at it and understand how it worked. The rocket was equally straightforward. The M6, 2.36 inches in diameter, 19 inches long, weighing 3.5 pounds. At the front, a shaped charge warhead containing 1.6 pounds of explosive wrapped around a copper cone. At the rear, a simple solid-fuel rocket motor and 6 fixed fins for stability. On paper, it could penetrate up to 4 inches, roughly 100 millimeters, of armor plate. The shaped charge principle wasn't new. It had been discovered by accident in 1888 by Captain Charles Monroe at Fort Monroe, Virginia. Monroe was testing explosives when he noticed that a stick of dynamite with the manufacturer's stamp, a small concave indentation, blew a surprisingly deep, precise hole in a steel plate when the stamp faced the target. The cavity focused the explosive force into a jet instead of dispersing it in all directions. German and Austrian engineers had been studying the effect since before World War I. They understood the physics. Under the extreme pressures of detonation, the copper liner collapses and is squeezed forward at velocities exceeding 8,000 meters per second. At those speeds and temperatures above 5,000 degrees Celsius, armor doesn't crack or shatter. It flows like liquid. The jet punches through as if the steel were warm butter. German engineers knew all of this. They had patents. They had research papers. What they didn't have in 1942 was a mass-produced infantry weapon using the principle. The Americans did. And when German tankers first encountered that weapon in the deserts of North Africa, they laughed. Tunisia, the weapon that didn't work. The morning of November 9th, 1942, the fighting for Oran has ended. The Vichy French have agreed to a ceasefire. But in Tunisia, where German forces are pouring in to block the Allied advance, the real war is about to begin. Private James Mitchell of the 1st Infantry Division crouches in a shallow wadi outside the town of Tebessa. He's been issued one of the new bazookas 2 weeks ago during the voyage across the Atlantic. He's fired it exactly twice in training, both times at a stationary target, both times hitting nothing. The weapon seemed powerful in theory. In practice, it felt like holding a piece of drainage pipe with a toy rocket. Now, through the wavering heat of the desert morning, he sees 3 Panzer III tanks moving down the road toward the American positions. Mitchell's hands shake as he loads an M6 rocket. His loader, a 19-year-old from Ohio named Harris, keeps looking at the approaching tanks and whispering, "Jesus Christ," over and over. The lead tank is about 80 meters away. Mitchell knows from the brief training that the effective range is supposed to be 120 meters, but his instructor had admitted that nobody really knew. The weapon was too new. Mitchell shoulders the tube, aims at the lead tank's side where the armor is thinner, and fires. The rocket launches perfectly. The trajectory is flat and fast, nothing like the arcing mortar rounds Mitchell is used to. It strikes the Panzer III's side with a metallic clang. Mitchell and Harris wait for the explosion. Nothing. The rocket bounces off and tumbles into the sand. A dud. The tank's turret begins to traverse toward their position. Mitchell reloads with trembling fingers. Harris is no longer whispering prayers, but is now openly weeping. The second rocket loads. Mitchell fires. This time the rocket detonates on impact. There's a flash, a cloud of smoke and dust. For a heartbeat, Mitchell thinks they've done it. Then the smoke clears. The tank is still moving. There's a small black mark on the armor where the rocket hit, but no penetration. The Panzer III's machine gun opens fire, and Mitchell and Harris are scrambling back through the wadi as bullets snap overhead. This scene repeated itself across Tunisia in the winter of 1942 and 43. Soldiers who had been told the bazooka was their answer to German armor found themselves holding a weapon that failed more often than it worked. The problems were everywhere. The M6 rocket's electric ignition system was catastrophically unreliable in desert conditions. Sand got into the battery compartment. Moisture from rare rain showers corroded the contacts. Even in perfect conditions, roughly 1 in 3 rockets failed to ignite when the trigger was pulled. Soldiers would shoulder the bazooka, squeeze the trigger, hear a click, and nothing. The tank kept coming. When the rockets did fire and hit, many failed to detonate. The impact fuse was overly sensitive to how the rocket struck the target. If it hit at a shallow angle, especially against sloped armor, the fuse often failed to trigger. The rocket would bounce off or crumple without exploding. German tank crews reported being hit multiple times by American Offenrohrer without any damage beyond scratched paint. And even when everything worked, when the rocket fired and flew true and detonated on impact, the M6's penetration was inconsistent. The early rockets had a pointed nose that looked aggressive but actually worked against them. When hitting sloped armor at an angle, the point caused the rocket to deflect before the shaped charge could form its jet properly. Against the 60mm side armor of a Panzer III, the M6 sometimes penetrated, sometimes didn't. Against the 80mm frontal armor of a Panzer IV, it almost never did. The psychological toll on bazooka teams was immense. These were 2-man crews, typically young soldiers with minimal training, being asked to let a 30-ton machine approach to within 50 or 60 meters before firing. They had to expose themselves, stand or kneel in the open with the tube on their shoulder, while the tank's machine guns and main cannon searched for them. And they had to do this knowing that their weapon might not fire, might not hit, and might not work, even if it hit. Casualty rates among bazooka teams in Tunisia were brutal. For every tank they knocked out, 3 or 4 team members were killed or wounded. The mathematics were simple and terrible. To get close enough to fire, you had to be in range of the tank's weapons, and a tank could fire back a lot faster than you could reload. German tankers quickly learned to identify bazooka teams by their silhouette, 2 men with a long tube, and to target them immediately. One Panzer IV commander later recalled that American bazooka men were the easiest kills on the battlefield. They had to stand still to aim. Their backblast gave away their position instantly, and they usually only got 1 shot before his gunner cut them down. By January 1943, morale among American infantry regarding the bazooka had collapsed. Units were refusing to carry them. Soldiers were abandoning them in the field, claiming they were too heavy, when the real reason was they didn't want to be the one chosen to carry a weapon that might get them killed for nothing. Officers filed reports requesting that the bazooka be withdrawn and replaced with something, anything, that actually worked. But in those same reports, buried in the complaints and the casualty figures, were a handful of different stories. Cases where the bazooka had worked, where a well-aimed shot at close range had penetrated a tank's side or rear armor and set it ablaze, where a skilled team had knocked out 2 or 3 vehicles before being forced to withdraw. These successes were rare, maybe 1 in 10 engagements, but they proved the weapon's potential, and they caught the attention of someone who mattered. The engineers take notice. February 1943. the Kummersdorf Proving Ground, 30 kilometers south of Berlin, a secure facility where the Wehrmacht tests captured enemy equipment. On a table in a concrete building sit the remains of 2 American bazookas captured near Kasserine Pass in Tunisia and 14 M6 rockets in various states of disassembly. Around the table stand a group of German engineers from the Ordnance Department, including Oberingenieur Werner Oswald, a specialist in anti-tank weapons. Oswald picks up one of the captured rockets and turns it over in his hands. The construction is crude, welds visible, stampings rough. The copper liner of the shaped charge is thin, barely 0.8 of a millimeter, and shows clear press marks. It looks like something made quickly, without care for finish or precision. He sets it down and examines the launcher. Even worse, the steel tube is simple, seamless pipe. The trigger mechanism could have been designed by a locksmith. The sights are just bent metal. There are no precision parts anywhere. Oswald has seen German anti-tank weapons. They're masterpieces of engineering, tight tolerances, hand-fitted components. This American tube looks like it was assembled in a farmyard. But the reports from Tunisia are impossible to ignore. American infantry are using these tubes to destroy German tanks, not often, not reliably, but often enough to matter. Oswald needs to understand how. They take the bazooka to the range, set up an 80mm armor plate from a captured French tank at 50 meters. Oswald shoulders the tube himself. He's handled the German Panzerschreck, which is still in development, so the weight and balance feel familiar. But the bazooka is lighter, less refined. He fires, the rocket whooshes out, trailing flame and smoke. The flight is stable, faster than he expected. Impact. The explosion is sharp, focused, not the blast of a conventional warhead. When the smoke clears, Oswald walks to the target plate. There's a hole, perfectly circular, about 5 centimeters across. The edges are beveled inward, melted. Behind the plate, he finds traces of copper that punched through and splattered across a wooden board set 1 meter back. The penetration depth, measured carefully, is approximately 140 millimeters. Oswald stares at the hole for a long moment. Then he returns to the firing line, and they shoot 10 more rockets. The results are consistent. Penetration ranges from 70 to 140 millimeters, depending on angle and distance. Every rocket that hits creates that same clean hole. The shaped charge jet cuts through steel like it isn't there. Back in the concrete building, Oswald drafts his report. His conclusion is blunt. The Americans have created a weapon that is simpler than any German analog, costs perhaps 1/10 as much to produce, and is 3 times more effective than anti-tank rifles at close range. More importantly, it can be manufactured en masse without special tooling or skilled labor. Germany is losing this race because while we search for perfection, the Americans made good enough and launched mass production. The report goes up the chain. It reaches Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments. Speer reads it and understands immediately. This isn't about one weapon. It's about philosophy. Germany produces the best tanks in the world, but produces them slowly, in small numbers, with components that require precision machine tools and skilled workers who are increasingly scarce. America produces adequate tanks quickly, in vast numbers, with assembly line methods that any factory can adopt. The bazooka is the same principle in miniature. It's not the best anti-tank weapon Germany could design, but it's good enough, and there are hundreds of thousands of them. Speer summons the development team working on Germany's own rocket launcher, the Panzerschreck. He shows them the American bazooka and Oswald's report. "Can we copy this?" he asks. "Make it exactly as the Americans do. Simple, fast, cheap." The lead engineer, Hauptmann Klaus Richter, examines the captured weapon and shakes his head. "Herr Reichsminister, we can copy the design, but we cannot copy the philosophy. Our industrial system is configured for quality. Every component must meet exact specifications. Every weapon must pass rigorous testing. To make this as simply as the Americans would require retooling entire factories, retraining workers, abandoning our standards. It would take 6 months, perhaps a year, and halt production of everything else. And Germany in 1943 doesn't have 6 months to spare. So the German engineers do what German engineers do best. They improve the design. The Panzerschreck will use an 88mm warhead instead of 60. It will have better sights, better balance, better range. It will be technically superior to the bazooka in every measurable way, but it will cost 3 times as much to produce. It will take 3 times as long to manufacture. And it won't reach frontline units in significant numbers until the late summer of 1943, by which time the Americans will have produced nearly 250,000 bazookas. This is the central irony. The Germans understood the bazooka's principle better than the Americans did. They had been researching shaped charges since before World War I. They had the engineering expertise to build a superior weapon. What they lacked was the ability to build an adequate weapon quickly enough to matter. And on the battlefield, timing beats perfection. Every time. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The weapon evolves. Spring 1943. The Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. In a workshop that smells of grease and cordite, civilian engineers from General Electric and Army Ordnance officers are gathered around a disassembled bazooka. Spread on the table before them are reports from Tunisia. Every malfunction, every failure, every dead soldier. The lead engineer, a man named Robert Patterson, who designed refrigerators before the war, reads through a field report from a lieutenant whose entire bazooka section was wiped out near Sidi Bouzid. The lieutenant survived because he had gone back to get more ammunition. When he returned, his 6 men were dead around their tubes. 4 rockets lay unfired in the sand. Battery failures. Patterson sets down the report and looks at his team. "Gentlemen," he says quietly, "we have soldiers dying because our electrical system doesn't work in the desert. Fix it. The solution, when it comes, is elegantly simple. Remove the batteries entirely. Replace the electrical ignition with a magneto system triggered by the trigger itself. When the soldier squeezes, a small generator creates a spark that fires the rocket. No batteries to corrode, no electrical contacts to fail in sand or moisture. It works in any climate, any condition. The second problem is the rocket itself. The pointed nose that looks so aggressive is causing deflections against sloped armor. The engineers replace it with a blunt, rounded nose that maintains its angle of impact better. They redesign the fins from 6 rigid metal pieces to a more stable cylindrical assembly that's less likely to bend during transport. The new rocket is designated M6A3. In testing, it penetrates consistently up to 4 inches, 102 millimeters of armor plate. More importantly, it detonates reliably. The failure rate drops from 1 in 3 to 1 in 20. The launcher itself is redesigned. The M9 bazooka can be broken down into 2 pieces that lock together with a coupling mechanism. This makes it easier for paratroopers to carry, easier to stow in vehicles, easier to conceal. The weight drops slightly. The balance improves. A pistol grip replaces the awkward forward hand position. The sights are refined. By the summer of 1943, the M9 and M9A1 variants are shipping to units in Sicily and Italy. And now, for the first time, American soldiers have a bazooka that works more often than it fails. But the weapon is still limited by physics. 60 millimeters of diameter means 60 millimeters of shape-charged jet. Against the newest German tanks, the Panther and the Tiger, that's barely adequate. The Tiger's side armor is 80 millimeters. The Panther's is 50, but heavily sloped. A bazooka can penetrate both, but only at close range, only at the right angle, only with luck. The soldiers adapt. They have to. The alternative is facing a Tiger with rifles. Learning to hunt tigers, June 19th, 1944. Villers-Bocage, France. 5 days after D-Day, the British 7th Armoured Division is probing toward the town when a single Tiger tank, number 231, commanded by SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann, ambushes the column. In 15 minutes, Wittmann destroys 25 British tanks and armored vehicles. The column is shattered. The attack stalls. American commanders studying the reports understand the problem. The Tiger is not just a tank, it's a mobile fortress, frontal armor 100 millimeters thick, an 88 millimeter gun that can kill a Sherman from 2 kilometers away. And now they're appearing in Normandy in numbers that intelligence had assured them would be minimal. The official response is to avoid them. Let the Shermans engage from multiple angles. Call in airstrikes, use artillery. But infantry officers know that in the hedgerows of Normandy, in the narrow lanes and small fields, tanks and infantry will meet at close range. And when an infantryman meets a Tiger at 50 meters, he needs more than advice to avoid it. Sergeant William Murphy of the 29th Infantry Division develops a tactic that spreads through the ranks by word of mouth, taught in foxholes and ruined farmhouses, never written in any manual. The Triangle of Death, Murphy calls it. 3 bazooka teams position themselves at the corners of an imaginary triangle along a likely tank route. They space themselves 30 to 40 meters apart, hidden in hedgerows or buildings. When a Tiger enters the killing zone, they let it pass the first position without firing. This requires iron discipline. The first team watches 56 tons of armor crawl past within spitting distance and does nothing. When the Tiger is fully in the triangle, the first team fires at the tracks or road wheels, not to destroy, but to immobilize. Even if they miss the tracks, they'll force the tank to stop and assess the threat. The moment the tank stops, the second and third teams fire at the side and rear armor simultaneously from different angles, multiple hits, overwhelming the crew's ability to respond. The tactic works, but it demands courage that borders on madness. The first shooter has to let the tank pass him, knowing that if he's spotted, if the tank sees his position before he fires, the turret will swing and he'll be dead before he can blink. It's like standing on the tracks waiting for a train. Murphy tells new replacements, and then stepping in front of it at the last second. Private Eugene Rowe of the 101st Airborne uses the tactic near Carrington. His team positions itself in the ruins of a stone barn overlooking a crossroads. At dawn on June 14th, a Tiger approaches from the west. Rowe is the first position. He crouches in the barn's shadows, watching through a gap in the wall as the massive tank grinds past his location. The distance is perhaps 15 meters. He can hear the crew talking inside, voices muffled by armor. He can smell the exhaust. Every instinct screams at him to shoot now, to do something, anything. But he waits. The Tiger passes. Now it's broadside to his 2 teammates, positioned in a farmhouse 40 meters to the south. They fire together. Both rockets hit the tank's side between the road wheels. One penetrates. The Tiger lurches, stops. Black smoke begins pouring from the hatches. The crew bails out through the top. They're running across the road when Rowe sees the tank commander, an officer, stop and turn back toward the tank as if he's forgotten something. Then he sees the smoke and keeps running. Later, examining the knocked-out Tiger, Rowe finds the penetration hole in the side armor. It's about 7 centimeters wide, clean, precise. The shaped charge jet passed through the 80 millimeters of steel, struck the ammunition rack, and ignited the propellant charges. The internal explosion tore the tank apart from inside. This becomes the pattern in Normandy. Tigers are nearly invulnerable in open country, where they can keep infantry at a distance and use their superior gun range. But in the bocage, in the maze of hedgerows and stone walls and narrow sunken lanes, they're vulnerable. American bazooka teams learn to wait in ambush at intersections, in the upper floors of buildings, in ditches alongside roads. They let the armor come to them. German tankers begin to fear the hedgerows more than they fear Allied aircraft. At least you can see a plane coming. A bazooka team is invisible until the instant it fires, and by then it's too late to do anything but hope the shot misses or fails to penetrate. Oberleutnant Hans Schmidt of the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion writes in his diary in July 1944, "We lost Müller today. 3rd Tiger this week to American tubes. He was a good commander, very cautious, but it doesn't matter how cautious you are when they're waiting in every shadow. Yesterday, I ordered my driver to avoid the towns entirely, to drive through fields instead. And he asked me, what about the mines? I told him I'd rather take my chances with mines than with Americans and their tubes in a village street. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Battle of the Bulge. Desperation and Determination. December 16th, 1944. 0530 hours. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. American units, strung along an 80-kilometer front, are startled awake by the roar of artillery. Germany's last great offensive in the West has begun. More than 250,000 German soldiers, thousands of artillery pieces, and 700 tanks, including dozens of Tigers and the new King Tiger, a 70-ton monster with frontal armor 180 millimeters thick, are smashing into American positions held primarily by Green divisions that have never seen combat. The weather is brutally cold, 15 below 0 Celsius. Heavy snow, fog so thick you can't see 30 meters. Allied aircraft are grounded. The Americans are cut off, outnumbered, and facing the strongest German armored force assembled since Kursk. For the soldiers carrying bazookas, this is the ultimate test. Private Leo Palmer of the 106th Infantry Division is 19 years old. He arrived in Belgium 3 weeks ago. He's never fired a bazooka, except in training. Now, in the grey dawn light of December 16th, he's crouching in a frozen foxhole, watching a column of German tanks emerge from the fog like ghosts. He counts them. 3 Panthers, 2 Tigers, something bigger he doesn't recognize. Probably a King Tiger. Behind them, infantry in white camouflage. They're moving fast, not cautiously, because the Germans believe this sector is only lightly defended. Palmer's hands are shaking from cold and fear. His loader, a kid from Pennsylvania named Kowalski, is crying silently, tears freezing on his cheeks. They have 6 Mine-A1 rockets. The rest of their platoon has already retreated. They were supposed to go too, but Palmer's lieutenant told them to stay, to slow the column down, and then the lieutenant was gone, and they were alone. The lead Panther is 50 meters away. 40. 30. Palmer knows he should fire, but his finger won't move. The tank is enormous, invincible, death on tracks. 20 meters, the Panther's machine gun is traversing, searching. Palmer sees the muzzle swing toward their foxhole. Kowalski screams, "Shoot! For Christ's sake, shoot!" The spell breaks. Palmer shoulders the bazooka, aims at the Panther's side, and fires. The rocket streaks across the gap and hits just below the turret ring. There's a flash. Smoke. The Panther doesn't stop immediately. It rolls forward another meter, 2 meters. Then the hatches blow open and smoke pours out. The crew is scrambling out through the top, slipping on the icy armor. The second Panther in the column is already turning, trying to identify where the shot came from. Palmer and Kowalski don't reload. They grab their remaining rockets and run, stumbling through snow, up to their knees as the Panther's gun fires and the foxhole they occupied 1 second ago ceases to exist. This scene multiplies across the Ardennes. Small groups of American infantry, often cut off from their units, often with minimal ammunition and no support, holding improvised positions against German armor. The mathematics are brutal. A Tiger costs hundreds of thousands of Reichsmarks and requires months of factory work. A bazooka costs $40 and can be produced in a day. But the human cost is measured differently. Bazooka crews in the Bulge have an average life expectancy, from first contact with enemy armor until death or serious wound, measured in hours. The casualty rates are staggering. For every 100 German tanks knocked out by bazookas in the Ardennes, 43 bazooka gunners are killed and 87 wounded. That's 130 casualties to destroy 100 tanks. The mathematics would horrify any accountant, but war has its own arithmetic. Those 100 destroyed tanks might have killed thousands of infantry, might have broken through to the vital road junctions at Bastogne or St. Vith, might have reached the Meuse River and split the Allied armies. Sergeant Anthony McAuliffe, temporary commander of the 101st Airborne Division encircled at Bastogne, understands this arithmetic perfectly. When the Germans send an ultimatum demanding surrender, McAuliffe's one-word reply, "Nuts!" becomes famous. But what keeps Bastogne from falling isn't defiance. It's the bazooka teams positioned at every approach to the town. December 20th, Bastogne is surrounded. The 101st has approximately 18,000 men, a handful of artillery pieces, and 80 M9A1 bazookas with perhaps 300 rockets. No armor, except for a few light tanks. The Germans attack with Panthers and King Tigers from 3 directions. Corporal James Hendricks positions his bazooka team in the ruins of a house on the northern edge of town. Through the snow, he watches a King Tiger approaching with 2 Panthers behind it. The King Tiger's frontal armor is impervious to his M9A1. He knows this. Everyone knows this. You don't shoot a King Tiger from the front with a bazooka unless you're suicidal or desperate. Hendricks is both. He lets the King Tiger roll past his position, turns and fires at the rear armor where it's thinnest, perhaps 80 millimeters. The rocket hits low, near the engine compartment. There's an explosion, larger than expected. The shaped charge jet must have hit something vital, fuel tanks or ammunition. The King Tiger doesn't just stop. It erupts. Flames shoot 15 meters into the air. The explosion is so violent, it throws Hendricks backward through the doorway of the ruined house. He lies in the snow, ears ringing, and watches the 2 Panthers behind the burning King Tiger hesitate, reverse, and withdraw. They're not willing to risk the same fate. 3 tanks, 1 rocket. The best exchange rate of Hendricks's war. The siege of Bastogne lasts until December 26th, when Patton's Third Army breaks through from the south. During those 6 days, bazooka teams of the 101st Airborne knock out or disable 57 German tanks and assault guns. The division submits citations for 11 Silver Stars and 2 Distinguished Service Crosses for bazooka crews. 7 of those soldiers are dead before the paperwork processes. The bulge fails. Germany throws everything into the offensive and fails to reach the Meuse, fails to split the Allied armies, fails to force a negotiated peace. The reasons are complex, but buried in the after-action reports and casualty figures is a simple truth. German armor could not move freely because American infantry could stop it. Not easily, not cheaply, but they could stop it. And that changed everything. The Germans copy what they mocked. January 1945. The Hasag factory complex in Leipzig, Germany. The building shakes from Allied bombing raids every night. But during the day, the assembly lines run. They're producing a weapon that 6 months ago would have been unthinkable to German military doctrine. The Panzerfaust, a disposable anti-tank launcher. Dr. Heinrich Langweiler, the weapons designer, watches the production line with satisfaction mixed with bitterness. Satisfaction because his design works. Bitterness because it represents everything Germany once disdained. The Panzerfaust is crude beyond belief by German engineering standards. A steel tube, 44 millimeters in diameter, 80 centimeters long. Inside, a simple propellant charge. Attached to the front, a large, shaped charge warhead, 100 millimeters across. Total weight, 5 kilograms. Cost, 30 Reichsmarks. Expected penetration, 200 millimeters of armor. Effective range, 30 meters. The aiming system is a metal sight welded to the tube. The safety is a pin. The trigger is a lever. A soldier removes the pin, aims, presses the lever, fires, and throws the tube away. It's designed to be used once and discarded. This is heresy to German military culture. German weapons are built to last. They're maintained, cleaned, passed from soldier to soldier. The idea of a disposable weapon, something you use and discard like a paper cup, violates everything the Wehrmacht believes about the relationship between a soldier and his equipment. But Germany is losing. The factories are being bombed. Raw materials are scarce. Skilled workers are dead or drafted. And German infantry is facing an endless tide of American Shermans and Soviet T-34s with nothing but rifles and prayers. The Panzerfaust is Germany's admission that the Americans were right. That, good enough, beats perfect when you don't have time for perfect. That, a simple weapon you can produce by the millions, beats a masterpiece weapon you can only produce by the thousands. Langweller's design is deliberately crude. The tube doesn't need to last for hundreds of shots, so he uses thin, cheap steel. The sight doesn't need to be precise because the effective range is so short that you're essentially pointing and hoping. The warhead doesn't need exotic materials because copper works fine, and Germany still has copper. Production begins in August 1944. By September, the first Panzerfausts reach frontline units. By December, during the Ardennes offensive, nearly every German infantryman carries one. By war's end, in May 1945, German industry will have produced roughly 6,700,000 Panzerfausts of various models. The soldiers love it. It's simple to use. It works. And unlike the earlier Panzerschreck, which requires 2 men and is heavy and awkward, the Panzerfaust can be carried by anyone. A cook can use it. A clerk can use it. Hitler Youth teenagers press into service in the final months can use it. American tank crews in Germany in early 1945 report a terrifying new reality. Every German soldier might be carrying an anti-tank weapon. Every window might conceal a Panzerfaust. Every alley, every doorway, every pile of rubble. The cities become nightmares where 60-ton tanks are vulnerable to teenagers with disposable tubes. The irony is complete. The weapon the Germans mocked in Tunisia, the plumber's pipe, has evolved into a principle they're now copying wholesale. They've even made it better in some ways. The Panzerfaust penetrates more armor than the M9A1 bazooka. It's cheaper and simpler to produce. It's more user-friendly. But they've made it better 3 years too late. By the time the Panzerfaust reaches mass production, Germany is on the defensive on all fronts. The Red Army is 60 kilometers from Berlin. The Americans are across the Rhine. German cities are rubble. The factories producing Panzerfausts are being bombed daily. Raw materials are so scarce that some later model Panzerfausts use paper-thin steel that crumples if you drop it. A Panzerfaust in the hands of a terrified Volkssturm militiaman can kill a Sherman, but it can't stop an army, can't stop 1,000 Shermans, can't stop the Allied air forces that own the sky, can't stop the artillery that pounds German positions day and night. In the ruins of Berlin, in April 1945, German defenders, armed with Panzerfausts, destroy hundreds of Soviet tanks. They turn streets into graveyards of burned T-34s, but for every tank they knock out, 3 more take its place. The Panzerfaust gives them a chance to fight, but not a chance to win. Victory goes not to the army with the best weapon, but to the army with enough weapons at the right time. And Germany learned that lesson 3 years after the Americans taught it in the deserts of Tunisia. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you're watching from today.